Emery takes the spot. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot.
What I'm going to do is read you a letter that I'm writing to someone in response to a letter they wrote to me. Now, the person who wrote to me is from the Sunshine Coast, and he's actually an author of a book called Payback, which he had sent to me. And it was a great book about a young man living on the street, having a very difficult life, rejected by his parents, and he ends up getting accused of murder and spends 15 years in Folsom Prison. And his ordeal in Folsom Prison and what he does afterwards. And it's an excellent, gripping novel, and I really enjoyed it. So I've had a conversation back and forth with this writer on the Sunshine Coast who's written plays and has been very involved in the music scene in the 1990s, and we've been having a correspondence. Now, I get about 3 letters a day on average, and I write to almost every single person who writes me, particularly if it's a quality letter, and I spend a lot of time in my letters, and this letter today took me 3 hours to write them, and it's not untypical of letters I write some people, but I thought it's got such a wide-ranging number of subjects that I would read you a typical or a letter that I'm sending out to someone in response to their letter to me, and most of it's self-explanatory. So here I go. Dear friend, and I say friend, that's the only change I'm making over the phone rather than use his real name. So I'm just going with that. And then the rest of the letter is identical to how I send it. Dear friend, love the long, complex letter you sent. More and more I've wanted to visit Australia and New Zealand. I've been responsible for a lot of activism in both those countries. For example, I bought a full-page ad in Wellington and Auckland in 1999 for the Aotearoa Legalized Cannabis Party, which is New Zealand's cannabis party, during their federal election in that year. I was corresponding with activists in Dunedin, Christchurch, and Auckland until I was put in jail last month. New Zealand finally banned my magazine Cannabis Culture in 2007, and Australia has always banned it, along with Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Interestingly, 4 out of 5 British Commonwealth countries. We had a photographer in Australia shooting pics of the largest illicit outdoor gardens we had ever seen. They were amazing. In Australia, they grow them huge outdoors. 99% of Australians live along the coast. To most, as you know, the outback is forbidding, dangerous, dry, dusty, and hot, as you found out yourself. But that's where the great gardens are. I'd love to read your scripts of The Raven that you've written, and A Skinhead Story, and Ghosts of the Cursed, your 3 different plays for the movies. When I get in the U.S. jails, please send them to me. My writing will be largely for podcasts and my memoirs, although I like your suggestion that I should do plays. I have many great stories in my life so far, and a good synthesis of my podcasts and memoirs is my podcast for Remembrance Day. It recalls many conversations and influences with my father, a wonderful man, and a soldier inmate here, and a former Canadian soldier I treated at the Iboga Therapy House, which is just up the road from you on the Sunshine Coast, not far from Half Moon Bay. It was a little east of Seychelles, and other recollections that involve times of war. My podcasts are at www.cannabisculture.com, and I did another today inspired by the Crown dicking me around on my bail conditions, which I should be out on bail, if only for a few weeks before I'm sent to the U.S., and I'm fully entitled to be out on bail, but the Crown attorney was suddenly sick today, and has delayed or come up with some fuckery for 2 weeks now. The Canadian government is stalling my bail hearing, so I am sent directly to the U.S. gulags without any brief reprieve with my awesome wife, whom I'd love to see, even for only a few days before I get out. So are your stories channeling your actual experiences? I get the impression that that's the case. That leads me to ask if you were abused at a young age, and obviously you are into ska music, as your books seem to indicate, and you use your books as a form of therapy. I must reiterate that Payback was a great novel. I highly recommend it to the other inmates here. It's in the jail library now. Skavuvi, your other novel, I had a harder time getting into that. It covered similar ground, but the character lead in Payback was immediately accessible to me. I'm going to recommend that book Payback to my son, who was abandoned as a child, and I adopted him at the age of 8, one of my 4 adopted children. He left home at 16 and became a heroin addict and lived in squats from age 17 to 20, a lot like the lead character in your book. And then he finally went to methadone, and then finally, after I got him out of emergency wards at St. Paul's and Vancouver General Hospital 4 times from overdoses, he's been clean living in Victoria for 3 years. It's been a rough road, but he was my smartest of the 4 adopted children I had. He was a good writer and a reader, so I hope he will translate his experiences on the street and in drug addiction into a TV or movie script one day, or perhaps his own memoirs. He's 27 now. I found that of the 65 patients I treated at the Iboga Therapy House, 61 did not have their biological father in their lives for all or part of their childhood. This was the dominant common theme I found between all addicts of cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs, even eating disorders. I treated Jordan, my addicted son, twice with ibogaine hydrochloride, and it worked wonders, stopping drug craving and drug withdrawal. I learned, however, that to be free of the demon of substance abuse, an addict must confront his or her psychic wounds caused by the abandonment of the biological father, and the doubt, rejection, and lack of confidence that invades the child's psyche. And then, after rejecting drug abuse, the former addict must never return to the old neighborhood where he used to score. He can't be amongst any drug-using friends and or girlfriends, and the clean ex-addict must embrace physical exercise and therapy, lots of it. Most addicts, when they're using, do not have any physical exercise in their life, and they don't do much soul-searching. All their daily effort is put into scheming for and scoring drugs for their addiction. So when they are no longer spending all their time and money on drugs, they do not know what to do with their time, and boredom sets in, and that leads to temptation, and that leads to relapses. To recover, an ex-addict needs to keep very, very busy, mentally and physically. Otherwise, he is doomed. My son had to go to a remote place where there was no heroin or morphine. He had no car and knew no one. It was remote, and he had to keep busy. That's how he stayed clean until after 18 months he could return to a city, Victoria, where drugs were. When my son Jordan was 17, he met an addict, age 14, prostituting herself, and they became friends and a couple. And for many years, their mutual addiction doomed each other. But they have both kept clean for 3 years and were reunited 36 months ago after my son put himself in relative isolation for that previous 18 months. I write prolifically here at North Fraser pretrial. It's my hope to continue wherever I end up. This is a maximum security jail here, and it's a pretrial, and SeaTac pretrial in Seattle will be the same. Very restrictive, but pen and paper can usually be had from a guard or ordered and arrived from the commissary.